because people are asking me, I know we'll get to that, people are asking me, when should we start metformin? Well, I don't know if metformin is not going to be antagonistic. Maybe it's dangerous in young people, and you need it only when you have the breakdown, right?
Hi everyone, welcome to the Live Longer World podcast. I am your host Astha Jain, and I have conversations with scientists and entrepreneurs that are transforming the field of longevity science. Just some quick housekeeping before we jump into today's episode. Firstly, if you wish to listen to this podcast on whichever platform you prefer, be it YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Google, or elsewhere, you will find my podcast as Live Longer World on these platforms, and you will also find all the links on my website, which is livelongerworld.com/podcast. I do a lot of research when I'm preparing to interview my guests, and I also take extensive notes while doing it. Going forward, I plan on releasing some of these notes to my premium subscribers. So if you wish to receive notes on research that's being done by my podcast guests, you can sign up to be a premium subscriber through my newsletter, livelongerworld.substack.com. Another way to receive updates from me is by following me on social media. I am on Twitter at livelongerworld and Instagram at longevityfuture, and all these resources and links are available on my website, which is livelongerworld.com. Okay, great. So if you're watching this on YouTube, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video if that's the case, and give me your feedback. Drop them in the comment section. Let me know what you like, what you don't like, what questions you have, and also recommendations for future guests that you might want on the podcast. And on Apple Podcasts, you can also leave me up to a 5-star rating. I would love to hear what you guys think. Amazing. With that, let's jump right into introducing my guest for today's episode. My guest today is Dr. Nir Barzilai. Dr. Barzilai is well known in the field of longevity and beyond, and is the director and chair of several institutes focused on aging research. Just to name a few, he is the director of the Institute for Aging Research at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine and of the National Institute of Health's Nathan Schock Centers of Excellence in the Basic Biology of Aging. Dr. Barzilai's research interests lie in the biology and genetics of aging. So he's done extensive work studying centenarians and supercentenarians, some of which we discuss in today's episode, and also he discusses in his book Age Later. Dr. Barzilai is currently leading an international effort to approve drugs that can target aging. And the trial he's leading is called the TAME trial, which is targeting aging with metformin to show that aging can be delayed by metformin. We'll dive a lot into metformin, the TAME trial, and also his work on centenarians. So I really hope you enjoy today's episode. And with that, let's jump right in.
Hi, Dr. Barzilai, and welcome to the Live Longer World podcast.
Hello, Asta. It's very nice being with you.
Absolutely. So, Dr. Barzilai, you've done a lot of work on metformin and centenarians and superagers, and I want to discuss each of these extensively. But I think maybe we start with centenarians. I guess, why did you get interested in studying them in the first place?
Well, it's when we went from hope that there'll be that we could do something about aging to basically to realizing the promise. And the way we realize the promise that aging has a biology and this biology can be modified is really by looking at long-lived models. And from long-living models, we didn't know, and still we don't know everything we need to do about the biology of aging, but it gave us a really good head start. And I was part of those. I did animal studies. I did caloric restriction. I had many other projects. But I thought, there is a model, we think, of very successful aging. In fact, it's not only successful aging, it's picking on the fact that there's a chronological age and a biological age, and it's not the same, and from your parents or grandparents or even friends, some of them are aging faster and some of them are aging slower. And I thought, let's take the people who aged the slowest, okay? People who are 100 years old. And let's see what's unique about them genetically or environmentally, and try to figure out, just like as we did with animals, if those are the same mechanisms, and how do we get them, what do we learn from them?
Fantastic. So I definitely want to know what we can apply from the findings to our health span. But maybe we dive a little more into the intricacies. So I guess you mentioned in your book that one thing you've noticed with studying centenarians versus other people who are not, that for most of us, it's about 20 to 30% of our genes that contribute to longevity. But for centenarians, it's about 75 to 80%. And even they don't even have the perfect genes. They just have some longevity genes that makes them live longer and have improved health span. What are some of these longevity genes, and do we know the mechanisms by which they work?
Right. So I'll give you the major example. And the major example has to do with the growth hormone pathway. And there is a growth hormone that's called growth hormone, but actually there are many growth hormones. In fact, the major growth hormone, as far as aging is concerned, we believe is something that's called IGF-1. And the point is that 60% of our centenarians have some genomic alteration in the growth hormone IGF pathway.
And just to clarify, low IGF is better for longevity, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is something that happens in nature. We all know that the small dogs live longer than the large dogs, but also the ponies live longer than a thoroughbred. And anytime we have a dwarf model or we create a dwarf model, they all live longer. And I think that it's really the main hypothesis here is that you need to shift from growth, which is very important for reproduction and evolution. You have to shift now to managing the breakdown that happens with aging. You cannot spend the energy and growth when you barely can keep things that way. In fact, we recently, so that's not in the book, recently we used UK biobank data. It's a big set of data. And we showed very clearly that high growth hormone is really good in young people. It's good for preventing death and preventing diseases and all kinds of things. And it's exactly the opposite in older people. It creates all those disease when it's high. It creates all the disease, increases mortality. So this is a proof to what we think, and I think it's very important to know that even for therapy, what we call the antagonistic pleiotrope. Antagonistic because things that are good for you when you're young are against you when you're old. We need cholesterol to build our brains, to build our reproductive organs. But if we have high cholesterol when we're old, we're going to get into lots of trouble. So this thing is important to know. By the way, it's also important to know for treatment, okay? Because people are asking me, I know we'll get to that, people are asking me, when should we start metformin? Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know if metformin is not going to be antagonistic. Maybe it's dangerous in young people and you need it only when you have the breakdown, right?
I guess from a biology perspective though, when is that shift from young to old?
Well, you know why it's so hard to tell you that? Because the biological and chronological age are not the same, right? Mm-hmm. So it'll be, look, we need biomarkers to tell us the biological age, and then we'll do better, right? For example, the Food and Drug Administration want to have a test that you take when you're 50, and it'll tell you, look, if the test says that you're biologically 40, you don't need colonoscopy, you don't need lots of things, you know, you don't need medical attention. We can save on you. If you're 50 and you're 60, let's get you into shape, okay? So this is very important, but we don't have it yet because the biological and chronological age is not the same. So I cannot tell you, you know, a number.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it would also be different for people, and if we had better biomarkers, it'd be much easier to test. So going back to IGF-1 then, you said, okay, using the UK Biobank, you showed how growth hormone when you're young is great, but when we're older, we don't want it to be too high. I think you've also noted there's some sex differences with it, where women who have lower IGF tend to benefit more, but it doesn't actually benefit men.
Yes, look, sex differences are something that unfortunately we missed so badly in our research. We kind of convinced ourselves that it's better to deal with males because who knows if menstruation and reproduction doesn't get involved. We missed a lot, and we know now that at least in animals, the drugs that we have are basically sex-specific, a lot of them, not all of them, sex-specific. And even those that are not sex-specific, sometimes they're better in males, sometimes they're better in females. In fact, you know, women now in the United States, I just heard it yesterday, they now open a gap. They live on average 6 years more. Mm-hmm. Now, some of that is because middle age or pre-middle age people in the United States have drugs problem and suicide and guns. You know, there's a lot of issues that are not about the biology, but other things. But still, women live much longer. And, you know, 6 years, even if we cure cardiovascular diseases, we're not expecting to live much more than 2 years, okay? 6 years is a lot. And there's a lot of biology that we have to discover that. And it's absolutely true. In our hands, whether we handle the centenarians or whether we handle animals, when we futz around with the growth hormone IGF pathway, we get much better results in females than with males. But I would cautious, you know, if males think that means they can get growth hormone injection safely, I wouldn't say that, okay? But I would say there's less statistical significance here. So I would say the effects are really incredible in females and maybe less so in males.
So in male centenarians, then
let me just tell you, let me also tell you another thing that explains why I'm using statistical term. Look, for every 100 centenarians, 85 are women, okay? So okay. we have much less male centenarians in our study. Actually, we have better because of other reasons, but we don't have as many male to be so conclusive.
Okay, I see. So then I guess in male centenarians, but also maybe female ones, what else do you see that's protecting them and improving the health span and lifespan? I know one other point is cholesterol and the CETP gene, but maybe if you can touch on that or anything else as well.
Right. There are two genes that have functional mutations in centenarians and in our centenarians and actually in other elderly subjects like around the world. One is a functional mutation in a gene that's called CETP. It stands for cholesterol ester transfer protein. When you inhibit it, you get the high levels of HDL cholesterol, okay? The second is an APOC3 gene. And when you inhibit that, you get lower triglycerides and also increase of HDL cholesterol. Pharmaceuticals came to see the results of our study because they were developing drugs that will target that, not because they were interested in aging, they were interested in cardiovascular disease. But they thought, you know, if we're developing drugs that don't have other effects. Okay, part of the drug is that some of the drugs becomes dirty, they have other targets. If we develop the drug for that, that's a safety signal, because if centenarians throughout their lives have this decreasing expression, then we know we're safe. And that's why they developed, so Merck developed a CETP inhibitor, had a successful phase 3 trial, and Ionis developed an antagonist to ApoC3, also phase 3 trials.
Okay, so they're not out yet though.
They're not out. I used to check weekly. I don't think they're out yet. I think there are other marketing issues, other considerations for getting out a drug, competitors, other things. So I'm not sure what's the story.
I see. Yeah, I'd be curious to see if it does actually have an impact on non-centenarians. All right, so I guess last question on centenarians before we can jump into metformin. How can we apply some of these findings to our lives right now?
I'll give you an example and the challenge. So there is many pharmaceuticals developed an IGF-1 receptor antibody, okay, which prevents the action of IGF, and IGF-1 is the growth factor, right? They developed it because cancers have a lot of expressions of IGF-1, the receptor, and they thought it could be a great anti-tumor, anti-cancer therapy. And basically all of them failed because cancers were always smarter in, just getting over hurdles. So not so easy, but they developed the drug. And we, Derek Hoffman at Einstein, in my institute, got this IGF receptor antibody. I mean, we got it from Amgen, they murinized it, and we gave the IGF receptor antibody to old female mice, and they live 10% longer. But not only that, their health span, okay, has increased significantly. And I think I want to pause for a second on the health span issue, because we have centenarians, and you can say, so just a minute, did they become sick when everybody became sick? And now they're just sick for longer? That's not what we want to do. And indeed, the centenarians get their diseases 20, 30 years later. And if you think that's important, it is important that lifespan and health span goes together, but there's another thing. They're sick very little time at the end of their life, what we call a compression of morbidity. And this has a huge impact on medical care. I mean, we really want to be, choose your age. I promise you'll get there without any diseases, and you just are not going to wake up that morning. People kind of are intrigued by this possibility.
I think that's a great point. So thanks for bringing it up, because a lot of people, when I ask them, oh, do you want to, say, if you could live to be 110, would you want that? And most people say no. And then when I reframe the question and say, okay, what if you could still feel healthy when you're older? Would you still want to be 100 or longer? And they say, yeah, sure. I guess if I don't have any diseases, I can still feel young. Why not?
Exactly. When I started my career, I was interested in aging. I said the word aging, nobody wanted to know more. So I said, hey, actually, I'm looking at centenarians, so I should use longevity. And it took me a while to realize that the word longevity didn't release them from saying, oh, I'll have Alzheimer's for longer, I'll have, diabetes for longer. And it's really the health span that we're after. Now, quite frankly, the mechanisms, when you target aging, you're going to do both. Okay, so I'm sometimes saying, so health span is the label on the medicine, and longevity is the side effect, because people cannot afford it either, right? I mean, there are lots of issues.
Yeah. Amazing. All right, so maybe we jump into metformin for a bit. So metformin is this drug that has been initially used to treat malaria and influenza, I believe, and then it's been used as a diabetes drug, still very popular for that reason. And then I think researchers begin to find out that, well, it could actually be used as a longevity drug too. I'm curious, how did people come to find that out?
So I have to tell you, metformin was in Europe much before it came to Israel, like decades more. I think metformin was improved for therapy only in 1993. And I was a fellow at Yale in 1987 when pharmaceuticals started bringing metformin to the United States. And I've done a study to discover the mechanism of action of metformin for diabetes. Okay. Now, although I was interested in aging then, and I had an aging project, I never thought of metformin then as a gerotherapeutics. But what happened with metformin throughout the years is there were clinical studies. Okay, so those are control studies, right? Control blinded studies that showed that metformin prevents cardiovascular disease, metformin prevents diabetes in non-diabetics, metformin delays cognitive decline, and association studies, like hundreds of studies showing that people on metformin have less cancers, all kinds of cancers, and also less Alzheimer's. So it all became, in my mind, it became clear that it's not that by accident. And by the way, it's not through glucose, okay? They are all, sometimes with metformin, your glucose is worse. It's not through glucose. That metformin had specific effects on many other diseases, okay? Which is our definition of aging, okay? Aging drives those diseases. But I think it was in 2014 that a really important study came. And it's a study that cannot be done in the United States for now. It was done in the UK. And in UK, investors can go into pharmacies and find out without names, just by demographic data. They can find out when people had started a treatment. And there were 4 groups in the study. The first group was a group of patients with diabetes that were treated with a drug known as sulfonylurea. And those people were controlled, you know, same clinic, same doctors, same other things. They were controlled to people without diabetes. And after 5 years, and the endpoints were mortality. After 5 years, the group on sulfonylurea had double the mortality of the non-diabetic. So that's not surprising, okay? This is what we know. It happens everywhere. Diabetes, and by the way, it's not only because of complication of diabetes, it's because diabetes is an aging disease. So if you're aging quickly, you're going to get other diseases too. But then, and here comes the surprise, 78,000 people on metformin. So they have diabetes versus 78,000 people that are non-diabetic. And the people on metformin had significantly less mortality than the people without diabetes. The people on metformin not only had diabetes, they were more obese to start with, they were more sick to start with, and still they had significantly less mortality. So if you take this thing together, that metformin targets variety of seemingly unrelated age-related disease and also decrease mortality, you will immediately know that, that this is it. Of course, in parallel, there are all those studies that started, by the way, Nisimov in Russia started some of them, studies in animal that showed that metformin increased health span very significantly and lifespan a little bit less. Actually, in mice, they live less. The mortality in humans seems to be a bigger effect than the mortality in animals.
That's brilliant. That's actually fantastic. So a couple of points you mentioned. One, I guess, what are the mechanisms by which you think metformin is geroprotective? I know there's something probably going on with mTOR and mitochondria. What do you think is happening?
So, you know, we geroscientists created these concepts of hallmark of aging.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a complete list. We're discovering other things, but basically in order to be a hallmark of aging, you need to show that something goes wrong with aging, and if you fix it, you get an increased health span and lifespan. Okay, that's how you become a hallmark. There is an interesting thing about the hallmarks. You don't have to fix all of them to get health span and longevity. In other words, they're interactive somehow. You fix one, you affect the others. When in metformin, there is a very strong evidence that it targets all the hallmarks of aging. Now, do I believe that metformin targets all the hallmark of aging directly? No.
Mm-hmm.
But this is what happens. When you have a drug that takes an old cell or an old organ or an old body and make it young, then you're going to fix a lot of things. Okay, and then we start arguing, oh, that's the mechanism or that's the mechanism. You know, so we're not sure. We think what's primary and what's secondary, but we're not sure. But the point here is that every drug, even with rapamycin, resveratrol, you know, many of those geroprotectors have other effects. Okay, and because of those other effects, we said, oh, you were totally wrong. You know, rapamycin is not an mTOR, it does something else. Well, it does. When you fix the aging, it does some other things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a great point, because I mean, biology is so interrelated, where you, as you said, you make an old cell young again. It's almost like restoring all the youthful functions, and a lot of things become better as opposed to just my liver or just my vision, for example.
Right.
So you're doing this trial, the TAME trial on metformin. Can you tell us a bit more about the TAME trial?
The TAME trial is, first of all, designed not for me. Okay, the reason I'm leading that is not to show what already was shown, that metformin has effects on other diseases, but to convince the FDA that prevention of diseases or targeting aging is something that should have an FDA indication. Okay, and that's the major reason I'm doing that. We're engaged with the FDA. We had to change our protocol. You know, we asked the FDA, you know, we basically said, we don't want to go to the end of the study and you'll tell us, oh, you should have done something else. Okay, we want to do the study the way you think we should do the study. And by the end of the study, you'll have to consider what does it mean. The study is done in 14 centers across the United States that have experience with aging, and some of them with metformin through other studies. Mm-hmm. And we will recruit 3,000 people between the ages 65 and 80, or 79, I should say. And in a double-blind, placebo-controlled study, we would look at outcomes. And the primary outcomes from the FDA perspective is time until any one of the diseases, you know, cardiovascular, cancer, cognitive decline, and mortality. Okay, so we're going to show you that we delay everything. And I think this is a concept that is very hard for people who are in silos, right? They look at one disease and they think that's the only thing, and they don't consider aging for age-related disease. They don't even study old animals for an age-related diseases. The concept is, look, we're agnostic, okay? We have no idea what disease you'll get next. If your mother is diabetic and you're obese, you'll get diabetes first, but whatever it is, you're going to get a point for every disease you're going to get. And this is a concept that's hard for people to understand, because they think every disease has a mechanism, but our mechanism is aging,
Right.
the biology of aging.
Yeah, I think in some previous presentations, you've shown this chart where you just look at all the diseases and the biggest risk factor is age. I mean, it doesn't, nothing else matters. It's just literally the age, which. Yeah.
Right, and it's, you know, it's logarithmic, okay? So if you think that cholesterol is a risk for heart disease, yeah, it's a threefold risk for heart disease. But aging is a 1,000-time risk for heart disease. And obesity is 8 times for diabetes, but aging is 500 times for diabetes. So aging is the major risk factor. And that's why if we don't treat that, you know, if you have a heart attack and you go to the emergency room and you get a stent or a bypass, we saved only the heart, but you're going to get, and we know you're going to get next Alzheimer or diabetes or cancer, because we never treated your aging, only your specific disease.
Mm-hmm. So then you're saying the TAME trial is almost the template for getting the FDA to view aging as a disease, or approve drugs for targeting aging specifically.
Right. I think it's template in the sense that pharmaceuticals that are going to develop the drugs will have this template that's going to, they'll know that this is how the FDA is looking at that, and it's also going to save them lots of money, because we need much less people to have a cluster of diseases than to look at each disease individually.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, that's a brilliant point. Right. You mentioned it's being done in 14 centers in the US. And I think some studies in China showed that people on metformin actually increase their risk of getting Alzheimer's disease. So do you think there could be some specific differences? Is there a way to test it across, I guess, globally?
Yes, it's true. There are a couple of studies in China, but those studies are not really answering everything. They're not cleaning the data for other possibilities. So look, let's say that people on metformin live healthier and live longer, okay? So you might catch, at the end of their lives, you might catch more Alzheimer because you'll push it to the end. You have to control in those studies for lots of things, you know, how many years you use the drug, and how old are you when you get the diseases and other things like that. So I think basically I'm you know, it's my bias is that those studies are not as rigorous as studies that we do here. But that's not to say that it's not possible that there's differences across, but you could show it only in clinical trial, not in an association trial. Those studies were all association studies. They went and said, oh, let's get all those people with and without metformin, let's see their cognitive function. But there are other things that you need to understand about who are those people, how did they get there? And of course, those people also have diabetes. So it's not only that they're on metformin, they have diabetes too. So you have to compare it to subgroups and things like that.
100%.
which hasn't been done adequately.
I see. Okay, yeah. Being able to control for other lifestyle genetic factors. So I guess, is the TAME trial, is there a way to control for lifestyle factors?
Well, look, when you have a double-blind placebo control, you assume that you control for everything, right? The patients are not, the patients don't need, they shouldn't know what they are on. And I guess if people volunteer to the trial, some of them will do other things, but you expect it to be similar between groups.
Okay, yeah, I see. What are some other studies that are being done on metformin that you're aware of?
Well, the Department of Defense has a study that I think is a cardiovascular endpoint study on metformin in non-diabetic patients. Look, there are lots of studies around the world. I mean, I'm doing, I've done a metformin study where we took elderly people and we gave them either metformin and placebo for a few weeks, and then we switched it. But at the end of each period, we took biopsy of their adipose tissue and muscle. Mm-hmm. And we looked at the transcript, the expression of RNA in those tissues and asked, does it change and does it become more youthful? Okay. And that's pretty much what we found. So there are small clinical trials and there are larger trials. And the interesting thing is, first of all, there's no batch trial that I am aware of. There is no trial that showed that metformin killed some, not killed, but that was associated with worse outcomes. Mm-hmm. I would say that 80% of the trials are always positive. Macular degeneration, everybody has their own silos. They use metformin and they have all those studies. And 80% of them are significantly different in favor of metformin. So there's a huge support in the literature. And I would tell you another thing. During COVID, there are 9 papers around the world that shows that people who took metformin had less hospitalization and less mortality. There's even, and by the way, when I'm saying less mortality, they had third the mortality of others, if we could get metformin to the elderly during this period, we might have been in a totally different shape now. Okay. Unfortunately, the timing didn't work that way. So.
That's incredible. I was going to ask you about that. Is that because you think metformin is making the immune system more robust as well? What do you think is happening?
Yes, right. That's part of the hallmarks of aging. But look, it's one thing as far as the immune response, but it's not only the immune response, because your whole body has to be resilient against a severe disease, okay? Mm-hmm. So it's not only that you have to change the immunity, okay? You have to change the body, and you can do it with a gerotherapeutic, okay? Not with an immune thing on its own.
I see, yeah. And going back to one of the points you made earlier, I agree with you that metformin is one of the safest drugs out there, that 80% of the studies show at least some positive benefit using metformin and really no side effects. There are, I guess, some common concerns I know that people have, so it would be nice to address them. One is metformin and exercise, and you already mentioned some of that, where you took muscle biopsies and you saw that the muscle strength functioning was that of a younger body, younger cell, but I guess muscle mass seems to be a little blunted. So maybe if you could just clarify that for people.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. So, in order to build muscle, okay, to increase muscle mass, you need to activate the mTOR pathways, okay? And as Matt Kaberlein told you before, we want mTOR pathway to be down, okay, with aging. So there were studies that took elderly people, exercised them, and half of them were on metformin. And actually, the grant for this study and the hypothesis was that they'll be synergistic to each other, okay? They'll add to each other. And what the researcher found, it's not only one group, it's a couple of groups, and they showed that when you exercise, muscle increase, okay, for all of them, but less so with metformin, okay? Now, hidden in the paper, in supplement 4, is the most important data, that yes, the muscle was smaller, but the function of the muscle, their strength was the same. So explain to me, if the muscle strength is the same, it means that this little muscle, for every gram of this muscle, it does better than the gram of muscle itself. So we took, like the study I told you before that was only on metformin, we took the transcript from this group that published this paper, and we showed really two things. A, that the transcripts that are mTOR related were decreased, okay, and that's why the muscle didn't grow as much. But on the other hand, genes that are associated with the other hallmarks of aging, like for autophagy or inflammation or other things, have been changed and been more youthful. So there is a trade-off. So I always say, if if it's important for you to show your muscle, don't take metformin. But if you're concerned with aging, I think it's good. You still get the benefit of exercise and the muscle. But also, look, I think what's missed in all that, I think the muscle, how the muscle looks like is not the strength of metformin. But remember, muscle is one organ, and metformin has all those other effects, right? On heart and on brain, on other things. So you have to look at it at all, and there might be trade-off, but I don't think the trade-offs are so big. Metformin is going to be great for the whole body, and metformin is not bad for the muscle, okay? The muscle function is the same. So I think this is, the perspective that I'm caring about that. And at least it's my data, I can claim that I believe in it because I studied it.
Right, because the strength of the muscle is still the same and you're improving other longevity factors in your body. And perhaps there could be a case that's made where, when you're younger, you're building muscle mass, maybe you don't have to take it, but at some point you start taking it, knowing the trade-off that, yes, your muscle mass may be reduced or not grow as much, but your strength is still going to remain and you're improving longevity.
I say that's you got it exactly right. That's really back to the antagonistic pleiotraphy, right? I mean, if you're young, you don't need metformin, build your muscle. It might pay well for the future, right? And if you're older, then you have to think of metformin's all effects and the fact that maybe the muscle is not going to be so big, but it's going to have a good quality, and that's the trade-off.
Mm-hmm. But outside of muscle, though, I know some people mention, even when they're doing aerobic or high intensity anaerobic exercise, they feel like their performance isn't as strong. And this is not when you're lifting or weightlifting, this is more cardio related, I guess. Do you know of any such data that supports that?
I don't know data. Look, people, first of all, people believes might be true to them. Look, we're very different individually, okay? And I don't doubt if people say, I'm doing intermittent fasting. It's not for everyone, okay? Mm-hmm. People cannot skip breakfast, okay? For me, it's ridiculous. It's so easy, okay? People are individual. They find what works for them. And I'm not going to, to argue with them. I'm talking about a population point of view. Now, I exercise with metformin, and I think I'm fine, but I haven't exercised without metformin, so I don't know, and I don't know what it means if people one day are on metformin, the other day are not on metformin. One of the things we discovered with this study on metformin, we washed out what's called washout. We took, right, there were placebo and metformin, or metformin and placebo, and we switched them. And we gave 2 weeks of a washout period, and it wasn't enough. Okay, it really wasn't enough. So the effect of metformin will linger. So I don't know what experiment you're doing. One day yes, one day not. 1 week yes, 1 way not. I don't know how you can really tell me that you feel that the function is that or then, but if that's how you feel, that's fine. I'm for you.
Yeah, I see. I mean, at the end of the day, people have to figure out what's working for their body and what's not. I guess one last question on metformin and exercise. I was gonna, what if you could maybe reduce the dosage? Because maybe there's an effect where if you reduce the dosage of metformin that's given, the muscle mass isn't blunted as much.
So, so that's another good question. I'll tell you, when we came to talk about TAME, some of us said, you know, it's elderly, let's give them less metformin. And some people get, no, just bomb them with metformin, okay? And the decision was, we're going to use 1,500 milligrams in the study, which is the dose that used in most of the metformin studies that were clinical studies. And yeah, we won't know at the end of the study what's the best dose of metformin. You know, we know that for diabetes, although you can give 2.2 grams, the maximal effects on glucose, which is not the same as on longevity, is 1,750 milligrams. Okay, then you get the maximal dose. So I don't know, and we're doing elderly, so we don't know the study. We just do the study that was done before, because we can miss both ways. We can make it more dangerous with higher dose and not as effective in lower dose.
Fair, yeah, that's a fair point. I guess if you can clarify one other question on a concern people have in metformin is whether they become hypoglycemic. And also, do you think if, say, I'm on a low carb or ketogenic diet, that's something to worry about if you're also taking metformin on that?
Okay, again, a great question. So, by the way, I'm a diabetologist, okay? My only clinical thing is when I'm in town, I'm going to attend diabetes clinic in the Bronx, okay? Mm-hmm. So diabetes is very dear to me. And, you know, the oral agents for diabetes, all agents for diabetes are either hypoglycemic or anti-hyperglycemic. What's the difference? Insulin, if you give too much, it'll drive your glucose down, okay? The sulfonylurea, the drug that I said before, it secretes insulin, it'll get glucose down, okay? If you take it when glucose is normal, your glucose will go down. Those are hypoglycemic agents. Metformin is not a hypoglycemic agent. Metformin, if your glucose goes down below normal, if your glucose gets to normal, what will change is your insulin level will become lower. It really changes your insulin sensitivity. So metformin doesn't cause hypoglycemia as a single agent. You'll take it and you're not going to have hypoglycemia. So yeah, we have to reassure people that that's not something they should worry about.
Absolutely.
Let's say that there were studies, and a placebo-controlled study with metformin, and like 3% of people on metformin said that they have hypoglycemia, and also 3% of placebo said that they have hypoglycemia. So it's in their mind, right?
I think part of it might be because when you initially start taking metformin, you sort of feel a bit of nausea. So maybe people might be confusing it with that, oh, I think I'm getting hypoglycemic and feeling really tired. It might just be the initial hump, but it goes away quite soon. Yeah. Right. Anything else on metformin that maybe I haven't covered and you want to touch upon?
No, listen, you did such a great job. I mean, you did a better job than anyone. You really were prepared for that. You really read a lot, and your questions were perfect. Those are the questions. Those are all the questions that people ask me, you know, like after I say what's metformin. You touched on really the thing, the exercise, the hypoglycemia, the dose. It's all what people who understand and want to be into it are asking, and thank you for covering that so well. Absolutely, no, I appreciate it. I do want to ask you a few last questions outside of metformin.
One is that in your book, you mentioned you've been consulting for the Singapore government. They have an aging population. I guess if you can speak publicly to it, are you still doing consulting work for them? And is the Singapore government doing anything differently? And I partially ask because Singapore is a model city-state in many respects, so maybe they're doing something for the aging population too.
Yeah, I have a total respect for Singapore, and the answer, I mean, I have friends there. The Yapsen Sang is the dean of the medical school. Brian Kennedy, a very known geroscientist, is there. Andrea Myers, they're all setting up an aging program. And so they don't need me anymore. But I think the thing that I learned is I was going the last time I was there, and I gave a talk after the Minister of Health of Singapore, and I went with Yapsen Cheng. I went over what I'm going to say, and I said, can I say why Singapore wouldn't be the first to do this? You know, something. And basically, I got educated that you know, Singapore is still a very small country, okay? And they're like, the United States should be first. We'll be the first to do it second, okay? You cannot throw on them all the problems of the world and let them be first, right? And I think that's actually a smart politics, but I believe in their ability to be Singapore first, second, the first to be second.
No, I'm glad. I mean, as long as countries are getting on board with it. I think that one of the funniest stories in your books was when you mentioned one of the officials asked you whether they should put metformin in water supply for people.
Right, right. And I appreciate it. You know, I don't think anybody in the United States say anything like that. I appreciate the question. The answer is no, but I appreciate the question because you want to know.
Absolutely.
You know, a lot of people are looking at, you know, metformin is a modification of an extract of the French lilac. Okay. So a lot of people are looking at it as a nutraceutical, really. Okay. And so they become more bold with that. But the truth is that formally it's not a nutraceutical, it's a drug.
I see. But in one of the lists I think you had presented to maybe the FDA or somewhere else, you said that SGLT2 inhibitors were on top as coming out as being geroprotective. Can you speak a bit about what they are, and can normal people, I guess, try to experiment with that as well, along with metformin?
Yes, it's another thing that haunts me from my days at Yale, where I used fluorescein, which was the first SGLT inhibitors. And what they do basically is they inhibit transport that absorbs glucose back from the urine to the body. So basically a diabetic patient will just secrete glucose and it won't be absorbed as long as glucose is as long as glucose is high. Again, it's not an hypoglycemic agent. So if glucose is normal, it's not going to be secreted through the urine anymore. So it's thought to have a specific inhibition of this SGLT2 receptor, but as studies, you know, the company, there are many companies who are developing this drug, and they all showed that beside effects on diabetes, there were effects on kidney and on heart. And in fact, those effects were not only in diabetic patients, but in non-diabetic patients. Again, when you have a drug that's not hypoglycemic, you can use it for any indication you want. In parallel, the ITP program, which is the testing program of the NIH to look at longevity drugs and their effects have studied SGLT2 inhibitors and have showed that they're gerotherapeutics. In other words, they enhance lifespan, again, more in males than in females, a little bit in females for the dose that they tried. So you have the geroscience point of view. It's a gerotherapeutic. And you have the clinical studies that showed that it affects other diseases. By the way, another very important thing, not only the diseases, but all cause of mortality. Okay, mortality that's not diabetes related. Okay, so when you have a drug that in human targets all causes mortality, like metformin, right? Then it's interesting. Statins, okay, the Lipitor that you take, which you take to prevent heart disease, it prevents cardiovascular disease, it prevents cardiovascular mortality, but it really doesn't have much effect on overall mortality. Mm-hmm. Although overall mortality is driven by cardiovascular mortality, it doesn't change overall mortality because statins are associated with increasing diabetes and other things. So, and when you give statins to animals, they don't live longer. So there's a difference between, so that's a geroscience-based approach to gerotherapeutic. At SGLT2 inhibitor, I don't know how it does it. Okay, that's another thing. I don't know how it does it, but it is a gerotherapeutic and it's being used and it's safe and you can repurpose it.
Interesting. So I'm guessing there are probably more studies being done on it as well.
In aging, not. I actually was trying to get those pharmacies and they didn't answer me. We have to be, I'm actually more interested in if they have a plasma to measure biomarkers of aging and see what happens to them. But maybe they'll want to do a metformin-like study.
Absolutely.
A TAME-like, I'm saying a TAME-like study.
Yeah. Two really quick last questions. What else would you like to be seen done in the longevity aging field?
Oh God, many things, but to pick up what I just said, if we should have more than one TAME study and maybe around the world, because we need to be convincing, we need to come up that nobody doubts us that aging can be modified. I also just want to say another thing. It's not only about aging. It's about, for example, people who survive cancer, because we give them radiation and chemotherapy, that's not good for their cells. And they age quickly. You know, there are kids that survive cancer that they get heart disease when they're in their 30s. So we need to help them. People with HIV get diseases 10 years before their cohort. They need help. People who are debilitated, people who are poor and have bad biology of aging, they all should, we should consider them as well. All those people who biologically age quickly. So it's not only the elderly, it's the society. Of course, if we want to go to Mars one day, we also need to solve aging because we're not getting there without getting disease and we'll never make it back before we solve aging.
That's a beautiful point. I remember reading that in your book and I highlighted that as like, this is brilliant. All right, lastly, just for fun, just a rapid fire question. What would you pick, metformin, rapamycin, or metformin plus rapamycin?
For me? Well, you know, I'm trying to be careful because, look, I'm the guy who's an MD, right, that drives those studies. And I don't want to look for other people weird, even if I don't think it's weird, okay? People know that I'm on metformin because I was pre-diabetic, although I'm not even close to being pre-diabetic. I could stop the metformin, but I'm not. And I'm doing a 16 8-hour fasting every day. And this is what I do for aging. That's not to tell you that I'm done, okay? And that I'm not doing now, so I'm telling you the whole truth, but I'm planning to do other things too. Because, you know, I didn't talk like that, you know, before I was 60, okay? But we had other geroscientists that became 60 and became very frustrated and said, you know, I cannot wait for the FDA to do that when I know that things are working. I want to do that. And I don't want, you know, I'm in this field because I really want to make an impact, and I don't want to stay behind either. So, you know, more is coming.
Makes sense. We'll check back in.
I was very political here, right?
Exactly.
But you understand. I don't want to. You know, I'm sensitive. As a leader in the field, I'm sensitive to everybody who's listening.
100%. I was just asking you for fun, but this has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Barzilai.
Thank you so much. Great questions.
Hello again, everyone. Did you enjoy today's episode and learn from it? Well, if so, please show some support by subscribing to my YouTube channel, liking the video, sharing the podcast, and leaving up to a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. If you want to dive into these topics further and receive extensive show notes on my podcast research, you can sign up to be a premium subscriber on my newsletter, livelongerworld.substack.com. If you want to be notified of upcoming podcast releases, sign up on my website, livelongerworld.com, or follow me on Twitter at livelongerworld and Instagram at longevityfuture. Thanks for listening, stay in good health, and I will catch you very soon.